Israel's defense minister says he held what he describes as painful conversations with the families of the hostages killed by the IDF in Gaza. But Yoav Gallant asked the public for understanding and for their continued support for the goal of eradicating Hamas. The defense minister also hosted a meeting with the country's military and intelligence leaders on Saturday, focusing on how to bring the rest of the hostages safely back from Gaza. Mark Regev is a senior advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He joins me now from Tel Aviv. Mark, we hear that the preliminary investigation is complete, that some of those findings have been passed to commanders and to soldiers. Should we expect to see the modus operandi of the IDF on the ground in Gaza change as a result of what happened to these three hostages?
It already has changed, Nick. There was not an understanding. The intelligence assessment up until the tragedy where the three hostages were killed, up until then, the intelligence given to the troops was, we expect to find our hostages in tunnels, in secret locations, in buildings, in some dark room. And the idea that they'd be walking around in a combat area, that was not part of the modus operandi. That wasn't expected. And I think that is one of the reasons for the tragedy.
But, I mean, will the operation at all change in Gaza? I mean, obviously it is very difficult to eradicate Hamas in this small area while Hamas are holding so many hostages. But you're going to continue with that track?
Not only will we continue, we'll beef up the pressure on Hamas. And the government, we do not see a distinction between the military pressure and getting hostages out. As you said in your report, if 2 weeks ago we got out over 100 hostages, we believe Hamas only released those hostages because they were under immense military pressure. Look, Hamas are cool, cold-blooded killers, very cynical in the way they look at human life. Their brutality was there for everyone to see on October 7th. The beheadings, the burnings alive, the shootings, the terrible, gruesome violence that they inflicted. We have no illusions about who we're dealing with. They're not going to release hostages because they've suddenly become humanitarians. On the contrary. But as President Joe Biden said, Hamas will respond to pressure. And the military pressure in the past helped us get hostages out. We believe there's a good chance it can do so in the future.
So the military pressure continues. The Prime Minister has suggested today that talks are also underway. Can you confirm that?
I cannot go into any details. I can only tell you and everyone watching that Israel will seize any opportunity that exists that will facilitate the release of hostages. It's one of the major goals of our military operation.
The Prime Minister also suggested that he has some fairly strong criticisms of Qatar. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Well, Qatar, as you know, has this historic relationship with Hamas. Qatar hosts Hamas leadership in their capital. And for years, people found this difficult to understand. You wouldn't host ISIS, you wouldn't host Al-Qaeda. How can you host Hamas, which is, as President Biden said, worse than ISIS? So I think the Qataris are responding to this pressure by saying, well, we can, through our relationship with Hamas, we can deliver the release of hostages. And they have helped in the past. And I'd say now to the Qatari government, it's time now for you to do what you can. If you say this relationship is beneficial, let's see you use this relationship to get more hostages out.
You've quoted President Biden a couple of times. I mean, this week he also called the Israeli operation, indiscriminate bombing, and suggesting that, some international sympathy and support is beginning to erode. We've got the UK and Germany calling for a sustainable ceasefire. We have these protests in Tel Aviv asking for more of a kind of negotiation rather than this stick that you're talking about. Does any of that pressure impact the policy that your government goes forward with?
Of course, we listen very closely to international interlocutors, and especially to our good friends, the Americans. Of course, we take what they say very seriously, and I believe what we say to them, they take seriously. And we are, as we pursue Hamas, and we will defeat Hamas, we will destroy its military machine, we will end their rule of Gaza. But as we pursue that campaign, we are very aware that we have to, at the same time, in parallel, work to safeguard the civilian population. We don't want to see unnecessary death. And at the same time, of course, augment the humanitarian effort. And as you know, just recently, we opened up the Kerem Shalom crossing for supplies to come in from Egypt to the Gaza Strip. We want to make sure that the civilian population of Gaza receives food, medicine, water, shelter. Ultimately, the target of operation is Hamas and not Gaza's civilians.
Mark Regev in Tel Aviv, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me, sir.